Wilful killing. The war crime of willful killing refers to the intentional and unlawful killing of individuals protected under international humanitarian law during armed conflict. This crime is defined and prohibited under various international legal instruments, including the Geneva Conventions and the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. Willful killing is defined as intentional and unjustified taking of life of non-combatants, such as civilians, prisoners of war, humanitarian workers, surrendered combatants, medics, UN peacekeepers, individuals acting on behalf of a state, commanders, or wounded or sick soldiers. Torture. Torture is defined as the intentional infliction of severe physical or mental pain or suffering by or with the consent or acquiescence of a public official or other person acting in an official capacity. It involves actions such as severe beatings, electric shocks, sexual violence, asphyxiation, mutilation, medical experimentation, or psychological torment inflicted on individuals for purposes such as obtaining information, punishment, intimidation, or coercion. To qualify as torture under international law, the following elements must be present. The crime is committed with intention to cause severe physical or mental pain or suffering. The crime is committed by a public official or another person acting in an official capacity. The crime is committed for purposes such as obtaining information, punishment, intimidation, coercion, or any other reason based on discrimination of any kind. Extensive destruction and appropriation of property. The war crime of extensive destruction and appropriation of property involves two main elements. 1. Extensive destruction, which means intentionally causing severe and widespread destruction of property, which is not justified by military necessity. This includes damaging or destroying civilian homes, public buildings, cultural heritage sites, and other civilian infrastructure. 2. Unlawful appropriation, which means unjustifiably seizing, looting, or misappropriating property belonging to civilians, humanitarian organizations, or cultural institutions during armed conflict. The principle of military necessity allows for legitimate destruction or use of property if it is militarily necessary for achieving a lawful military objective. However, acts of destruction or appropriation must be proportionate to the military advantage sought, and must not be excessive or indiscriminate. The war crime of unlawful deportation, transfer, or confinement involves the transfer of individuals protected under international humanitarian law during armed conflict from their homes or places of residence to another location without lawful justification. Under international law, detaining and confining protected persons into detention facilities without a legal reason is also prohibited and prosecuted. Compelling a prisoner of war to serve in the forces of a hostile power. This war crime involves the act of coercing or forcing a prisoner of war or any other individual protected under international humanitarian law, such as civilians, medical personnel, or humanitarian workers, to actively participate in the military operations of a hostile power against their own country or its allies. Willfully depriving a prisoner of war or other protected person of the rights of fair and regular trial. This crime refers to the deliberate and unjustifiable denial of the right to a fair and regular trial for prisoners of war or other individuals protected under international humanitarian law, such as civilians in occupied territories, detainees, or individuals accused of war-related crimes. Delivering unlawful judgments and dealing punishments without due process is also a violation of law and falls under this category. Taking of hostages. Taking of hostages involves the deliberate and unlawful seizure, detention, or confinement of individuals with the intent to use them as leverage to coerce others into meeting certain demands or objectives. Hostages are typically civilians or non-combatants who are unlawfully held captive during armed conflict. Utilizing the presence of a civilian or other protected person to render certain points, areas, or military forces immune from military operations is also prohibited. Perfidy. Perfidy refers to acts of treachery or deceit during armed conflict, where one party feigns a protected status, such as being a civilian, a medic, or a surrendering combatant, with the intent to launch an attack on the enemy. The key element of perfidy is the abuse of trust, or the exploiting of protected status to cause harm to the opposing party. Some examples of perfidy are feigning surrender, pretending to surrender to the enemy forces, and then launching a surprise attack. Misusing protected symbols, displaying protected emblems, such as the Red Cross or Red Crescent, to approach the enemy under false pretenses, and then engaging in hostile actions. Wearing civilian clothing, disguising combatants as civilians to blend in with the civilian population, and carry out attacks. Perfidy can often be confused with legitimate ruses of war, which are deceptive tactics used to deceive the enemy without violating the rules of armed conflict. Hostile settlement. This crime involves the direct or indirect transfer of parts of the occupying power's civilian population into the territory it occupies. This crime often happens alongside deportation of the original civilian populace outside its territory. Employing poison or poisoned weapons. Employing poison or poisoned weapons refers to the deliberate use of toxic substances, chemicals, or poisons as a method of warfare to cause harm, injury, or death to humans, animals, or the environment. This includes the intentional release or dissemination of poisonous agents, with the intent to inflict harm on combatants or civilians. Expanding ammunition. Employment of bullets or other projectiles that expand or flatten easily in the human body alongside other methods of warfare which cause superfluous injury or unnecessary suffering is prohibited under international law. Projectiles designed in such a way cause the bullet to increase in diameter, to fight over-penetration, and produce a larger wound, thus dealing more damage to a living target. For this reason, they are used for hunting, but are generally prohibited for use in war. Examples of such ammunition are hollow point and soft point bullets. Pillaging. The war crime of pillaging, also known as plunder, is the act of seizing property, valuables, or resources from civilians or enemy combatants during armed conflict, often in a systematic or widespread manner. Pillaging involves the unlawful appropriation or theft of property, goods, or resources from individuals, communities, or institutions during times of armed conflict. It can include looting, seizing of assets, or confiscation of property without lawful authority. Use of child soldiers. The use of child soldiers is considered a war crime and a serious violation of international law, specifically under the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the customary international humanitarian law. Children under the age of 18 are protected from being enlisted, conscripted, or forced into national armed forces or other armed groups for any purpose or in any capacity. The destruction of culture refers to deliberate acts aimed at destroying or damaging cultural heritage, including monuments, religious sites, artifacts, and other cultural symbols during armed conflict or as part of a systematic campaign, as well as erasing cultural symbols, traditions, and practices through targeted attacks.